Hello everyone and welcome to today's webcast on talent acquisition for the government of the future. Today we will be providing you with an understanding of current talent trends in Australia and globally. We will also share our insights as to some of the key steps government organizations can take now to attract the right talent for the future. My name is Isabel Pryor and I'm a marketing manager for Australia and New Zealand here at LinkedIn, and I will be your moderator for today's webcast. A few housekeeping items before we get started. You are all muted by default, so if you have any questions, please send them by our Q&A box, and I will ask our presenters at the end of this session. You will also receive an email with the presentation as well as the recording from today's webcast in the coming days. For today's webcast, I'm joined by Sheila Mistry, Director at EY in the People Advisory Services Division, and Lucy McDonald, Insights Lead Australia for the LinkedIn Talent Solutions business. Hi Sheila and Lucy, thanks for joining us today. I will now hand over to you to introduce yourself to our audience.
Thanks, Isabel. Hello, everyone, and thank you all for joining this webinar today. It's a great pleasure to be here and share this session with you. I'm a talent and change management specialist here at EY. Over my 20-year career, I've worked across many clients, both public and private sector. Through my work, I have had the opportunity to support many clients, not only to define and implement the talent management strategy, but work alongside them to determine the right skills required for their evolving organizations. I have experienced firsthand the contrast between public and private sector talent management, the attraction and retention strategies used, and more specifically, some of the challenges they face. Lucy?
Thanks, Sheila. Hi, everyone. I'm a Senior Insights Analyst with LinkedIn, and I'm looking forward to sharing our insights in today's webinar to help you understand how we can build the government of the future. My expertise is in leveraging LinkedIn's digital map of the global economy to enable organizations to implement data-driven talent strategies. I partner closely with both Australian and New Zealand public sector and enterprise organisations and witness their talent evolution with the rise of millennials, globalisation, digitalisation and the gig economy. As a result, I specialise in undertaking workforce skills assessments and implementing data-driven recommendations to build or source the evolving skills required to retain and attract top talent in this environment of change. We have an exciting agenda to share today, and we would ask that you submit any questions in the chat bar and we'll answer the selection of them at the end. Today we're going to focus on three key areas. Firstly, we'll identify the characteristics of the government of the future and the type of talent or skills it requires. We will then delve into the insights captured through our LinkedIn channels on the current talent market trends for governments both here in Australia and globally. And finally, we'll consider the initiatives government organisations can take now to attract the required talent. We'll cover the four elements of talent acquisition that are most relevant today. Throughout the session, Sheila and I will aim to give you practical insights to actively champion efficient talent acquisition strategies in your organisation. I will now hand it over to Sheila, who will take us through the characteristics of the government of the future.
Thanks, Lucy. Here at EY, we are fortunate to have a close partnership with LinkedIn, which enables our organisations to share leading thinking, market trends and insights to help organisations like yourself to proactively manage and plan your future workforce strategies. Lucy has worked closely with EY to assist in the analysis of the information and data to provide you with key data points on these future trends. Firstly, to identify the characteristics of the government of the future, we need to acknowledge that digital is disrupting governments worldwide. As a result of that trend, public sector organisations work to adapt to a new digital model. These characteristics ultimately impact the talent requirements of public organisations. As the needs of government change, talent acquisitions must step up to meet them. So let's start with defining what do we mean by government of the future. The government of the future will be able to effectively manage future challenges whilst delivering its promise to citizens. Digital is disrupting governments worldwide as the public sector organisations work to adapt to a digital model. It's no longer a luxury to be digitally enabled. it's a necessity. Digital technologies, infrastructure, and thinking and acting for the future now has become a priority for all governments across the globe, but more so here in Australia. Rising costs, employee expectations, real estate, and delivery efficiencies are all being impacted by digital disruptions. As we move into a digital age, how will our government services expand to meet these demands? Self-service portals, the need to transact with government services electronically, the transfer of information will all become part of the future world through e-government services. As our population explodes, so governments are under increasing pressure to meet the demand of the citizen. Governments, both local and federal, are tasked with meeting the housing, infrastructure demands that are required to meet the increasing population through smart cities and smart infrastructure. In New South Wales alone, we have a number of large infrastructure and housing projects to meet the demands of the expanding state. Here at EY, we've put this into a point of view, the power of three for smarter cities and more resilient cities. Increasingly so, we demand an open government, a government that is transparent with strategy, services and future plans, one that is accessible to citizens. How do you ensure you stay ahead of that information curve? Citizens these days are demanding more information. What is the taxpayer money being spent on? And how do we ensure that we are getting value? Governments are being asked to be more transparent, justify their spend and their existence. Inevitably, as more information becomes available in the public domain, so more scrutiny must be placed on information security. Citizens and governments alike must have the confidence to ensure that information captured will be secure and will not be leaked or hacked. Cybersecurity and privacy challenges have become top of the agenda for many organisations, not just the government. Only recently we've heard of a number of firms that have had client-sensitive or privacy information leaked and their systems have ground to a halt. So what does all this mean? To ensure that you meet the demands of your office, the citizens' expectations, the population growth, the demands on infrastructure and resources, you will need to evolve your workforce, engage and build a workforce that is digitally savvy, with leaders that can identify talent and drive a workforce to consider customer service first and foremost. A workforce that focuses on outcomes, efficiency and effectiveness. One that is agile, innovative and connected to digital trends. Recognise that your workforce is your customer as well as your employee, and that you must have an employee value proposition that attracts and retains your best people, underpinned by a talent management strategy that supports these growth areas now and in the future. The bottom line is you will need to completely change the demographic of your workforce to stay ahead of the game. The government of the future requires the right digitally savvy talent in middle and upper management to drive effective decision making and lead the execution of new digital service delivery models. That immediately changes your workforce, their expectations, areas of accountability and behaviours. Traditionally, government organisations have been very process and administration driven. Policies, procedures and protocols have driven leadership behaviours and outcomes to date. Your employee tenure was lengthy, with little churn, with many individuals joining straight from school or universities. However, over the past 5 years, we have seen a shift in this demographic. With the rise of digital, the introduction of new technologies, your organisation has had no choice but to modernise the workforce through new skills and capabilities required to operate the business effectively and to meet the demands of the population. Gone are the days of receptionists and ticket queues in waiting rooms. Today we see more self-service portals and applications to register claims, queries and engage online. You are more likely to be greeted by a young person with an iPad these days. Efficiencies, cost savings and greater demand to deliver more with less has resulted in many streamlined organisations. And so, as a result, our middle and upper management levels have had to roll up their sleeves and understand the technology platforms that now are just part of their current world. For example, a simple area such as approvals. Previously, we used forms that we signed. Now approvals are predominantly automated through workflows on the systems platform. E-confirmations have replaced signed receipts and invoices. Decisions are no longer being made on perceptions or points of view, but driven by insights and data trends. Shifting to a digitally savvy workforce naturally leads to a change in accountability for an individual and ultimately changes in behaviour. Digital brings a whole new set of skills, capabilities, processes and behaviours to the workforce, and your future leaders need to be across this, not just to support their current staff, but those of the future generations, many of which haven't even finished school yet. As the needs of the government organisations change, so the talent acquisition strategies must adapt to ensure that they are set up for the future.
That's a very interesting point on the rise of digital and the new skills required, and it's a great segue into our next topic for today, the current talent market trends for governments and understanding how prepared government is for digital change. In 2016, the Australian government acknowledged and announced that a shortage of data skills. This resulted in the release of the Data Capabilities Framework to drive its preparations for a digital future. And as we know from a series of skills surveys, that this trend in Australia also applies globally. In 2015, the US Government Accountability Office identified skills shortages in various government occupations, including and not limited to cybersecurity, information technology, economists, scientists and engineers, as well as contract and acquisition specialists, human resources specialists, and even accountants. Similarly, in 2015, the UK Civil Service recognised skills gaps in digital leadership, again cybersecurity, data analytics, digital forensics, digital program and change management, and in agile delivery. On LinkedIn, we can assess the current demand for particular skills by analysing the relative volume of in-mails sent by recruiters to talent on the platform. As a quick reminder for those listening, an in-mail message is a private message that allows recruiters to contact connections of a certain degree on LinkedIn without an introduction or their contact information. So based on our demand methodology, we identified the top 10 in-demand skills in Australia and also globally, and we noticed that they contain a significant number of digital-related skills. To name the top 3 globally in 2016, we identified firstly, cloud and distributed computing, second, statistical analysis and data mining, and third, web architecture and development framework. These all align with the talent market trends for the government today, where the focus has been on from changing the mindset from traditional on-premise infrastructure to areas such as cloud, remote access, and storage solutions. And this is absolutely the right focus, as many government entities look to upgrade old technologies to more agile platforms and have technologies with the flexibility to meet the demands of the future employee and the citizen. The gaps in digitally savvy talent highlight a critical need for governments to attract an unprecedented amount of skill and experience from outside their organisations. Our workforce analytics assessment on the top employers as data analysts, as an example or subset of digital talent, revealed that 4 of the 5 top employers are actually private organisations. This really highlights that the competitiveness with the private sector is a roadblock in recruiting digital talent required for the government of the future. In addition, we also know that young people are a shrinking proportion of public sector talent, and that young specialised talent, such as data scientists or data analysts, are particularly competitive to recruit for. We've done another assessment on LinkedIn for recent graduate data analysts as well, and we've actually identified the top universities for this type of talent to give the public sector a chance to sense check their targeting for grad recruitment. So in this competitive environment, there's really a lag for talent acquisition professionals in government, and it's actually a global trend. The US agencies report 800 funded positions open for at least 90 days for systems engineers and other science, technology, engineering, and math roles, with open and unfilled opportunities in cybersecurity as well. Such results underline that attracting young, digitally savvy talent, particularly with in-demand digital skills, is a significant pain point for government.
Thanks, Lucy. A quick question for you around this data. I'm curious to understand, do we have information on the gender mix in what you call data analysts here in Australia?
That's actually a really interesting question, Sheila. We do. So our data indicates that the specific segment of data analysts, female candidates represent 39% of the overall data analyst population on LinkedIn in Australia. There is, as you might expect, a gender gap within this talent group, as well as a skills gap that we need to overlay when considering any recruitment strategies. This might be a great moment for me to pause, because sometimes we can have a little too much data. Sheila, did you want to take us through some of the strategies organisations can use to address this gap?
Sure. Thanks, Lucy, for providing insights and backgrounds on some of these latest trends. I always find the abundance of data that is available fascinating and really insightful. There are 4 key elements to consider for talent acquisition as we move forward. The first is, how do we create a compelling employee value proposition? A clearly defined and consistently communicated employee value proposition is essential, as it is the background of your talent acquisition strategy. We know the face of in-demand talent in the public sector is changing to those with a digital skill set. Young people, and in particular to young talent with a digital or data specialisation. To match these needs, governments must transform their approach to talent acquisition by speaking to the audience they want to attract, the young and the digitally savvy. The value proposition for recruiting today's top talent should emphasize skills development and the purpose at work. In this market, the employer-employee relationship is impermanent and is instead focused on an alliance between both parties for a common purpose. Gone are the days of long-term tenure and retirement benefits. Instead, entrepreneurship and adaptability are now critical for a growing career. For the public sector, that means focusing the talent acquisition strategy on mutual value creation rather than long-standing loyalty. Transforming talent acquisition is also about approach, with a switch to a digitally driven strategy and digital platform. The LinkedIn Global Recruiting Trend Survey from 2016 shows that recruiting top talent is a social strategy and highlights the importance of relationships. Among 4,000 respondents, social professional networks was ranked first as the key source of quality hires, besting internet job boards second, and employee referral programs third. Employer investment in brand is also making a resurgence and is now cited as a key element in effective recruiting.
I completely agree with you, Sheila, and I believe this is actually telling because it reflects the changing pool of in-demand talent as much as the availability of new media to drive recruitment. By and large, millennials possess the sought-after skills, so the way top talent in this generation looks for work is a vital consideration. US survey data suggests that 60% of millennials apply directly to a company when searching for a job. That is significantly ahead of the 45% who search through a networking or recruiting event and 42% who use their campus career service. At LinkedIn, we actually conduct an annual global survey of approximately 400,000 of our members, asking them, what do you want in a job, to help inform our partners' EVP messaging. We're able to categorize the responses based on various demographics, and today I've cut the data by looking at the IT function, in particular in Australia. What's interesting here in the graph is that good work-life balance is ranked first for our IT professionals, and noting that female respondents rank flexible working arrangements ahead of excellent compensation and benefits, versus our male respondents who are more concerned with challenging work arrangements. Sheila, in your experience, how have you helped organisations to communicate their EVP?
In the past, we used quite traditional channels, media releases, recruitment agencies, higher education and university fairs. Today, whilst all of these are still very valid, it is impossible not to use social media channels. In fact, it is almost expected, if not fast becoming the norm. There are many benefits to using a social platform for your talent acquisition strategy. Firstly, compared with more conventional recruiting, transitioning talent acquisition to social platforms is an obvious and immediate win in cost reduction, reach and transparency. Governments can widen the pool of available talent by communicating at scale, including connected with passive candidates who are not actively looking for a new role, but could still be considered for a viable position. Social-led digital recruitment also presents an opportunity to develop a personalised connection with potential candidates. Governments can create a dialogue with top talent focused on purpose at work. Through direct communications and discussions with young candidates and digital specialists, governments can build a brand focused on career opportunities with social purpose and the ability to make a difference. This is a huge differentiator for the public sector and should be amplified in your strategy. Governments can also use tailored digital communications to consolidate their brand in diversity and flexibility. This will help convey a crucial message that government is a desirable place to work to younger workers or those from a tech or digital background who are accustomed to an entrepreneurial organisational structure. For government organisations is to make sure they attract the right talent to leverage the power of data analytics. Through data analytics, public sector organisations can assess and anticipate demand for certain skills. One possible form is through workforce assessment that examines talent, gaps, intersections and threats, then links talent data to market economic information so government entities can anticipate future needs and shortages. It could also include the use of data mapping tools to better see the ecosystem of available talent. Government and public sector organisations can use this information to plan for the future, including connecting with relevant talent early. Digital social channels are an important asset, not just for executing your talent strategy, but also for generating information. The ability to connect market and economic information with internal strategy and projections, including through the use of predictive analytics, provides a powerful platform for talent planning and for wider budget and resourcing decisions. This new data and these new test cases should be incorporated into planning and performance metrics at the leadership level and within human resources.
As digital transformation drives quick and significant change across the talent landscape, governments need to be first aware of the skills gaps they are facing, what functions and departments they are in, and how this could alter their future goals. They also need to build a vision around the kind of talent they need to fill these gaps, such as the types of talent that we identified earlier, such as cybersecurity professionals. So using the power of talent intelligence in the form of data and insights, we can enable the identification of skills gaps and how it compares to the industry and competition. If an organisation is looking to fill gaps through hiring, then understanding demand and supply dynamics and geographical availability of talent are a few insights that can enable those hiring plans. To demonstrate this, we've undertaken an assessment of the supply and demand of key tech talent on LinkedIn in the Asia-Pacific region, which can be seen on the screen now. As we mentioned earlier, it's been a key focus across government to change the mindset from the traditional on-premise infrastructure technologies to more technologies related to cloud, remote access and storage solutions. So assessing this data, we can determine that talent with the digital skills in the form of big data or cloud computing are currently in demand. As they're on the vertical axis, you can see them up high. And they're actually growing in demand across the horizontal axis. We can see that they're further to the right. But the key thing to note here is that they're in low supply. So that's the size of the bubble. So any talent acquisition strategy would need to allow for the difficulty likely in sourcing this talent in the external market.
Thanks, Lucy. Another insight I wanted to share today is our third recommendation to elevate the role for talent acquisition in government. What I mean by that is talent acquisition should become a strategic priority at the level of organisational leadership, giving it executive sponsorship, while ownership of the strategy would sit with human resources. The rising importance of social talent acquisition strategy can be a conduit for government to reposition recruitment in their organisation and revamp recruitment skills far and wide. The social nature of recruitment means that everyone at all levels is the face of the company and can play a proactive role in acquiring and attracting the right talent. And finally, the fourth element for a successful talent acquisition strategy for government organisations rests in its ability to measure its performance and learn from it to keep improving and remaining competitive. Social talent acquisition runs on a fast feedback loop in a noisy environment. Organisations must keep sight of long-term objectives and work within a formal monitoring, evaluation and investment framework. This requires solid investment in testing, measuring and refining strategies. At the same time, agencies should develop specific criteria for monitoring and reporting on skills gaps and on the fit of candidates acquired through social channels, including individual action plans, targets and outcome metrics. The metrics must be tracked consistently, such as in regular reporting dashboards within the human resources teams or for department leadership teams.
Thank you, Sheila, for sharing those 4 recommendations. Just to summarise what we've spoken about. First, using social media to consistently communicate your employee value proposition. This EVP needs to be clearly defined and aligned to the needs of the required digitally savvy talent. Second, it's about leveraging data and analytics to anticipate demand and to identify potential skills gaps to be prepared for the future. Thirdly, it's elevating the talent acquisition function to a strategic concern. And lastly, it's all about testing, measuring, refining your talent acquisition strategy to remain competitive.
Yes, that's correct. The questions you need to ask yourself are, what is our value proposition in the market, and where are the gaps between our objectives and how top talent sees our organisation? Where are the missing critical skills gaps in our workforce? How does our organisational structure champion talent acquisition? And finally, how can we learn from new talent acquisition strategies? So what can you do about this today? Well, first of all, assess your value proposition through surveys and crowdsourced feedback from in-demand talent. Secondly, use data analytics to assess and predict these skills gaps, reflecting on your organisational strategy, macroeconomic trends, and citizen feedback. Partnering with human resources to critically review talent acquisition within your organisation, including ownership and training at all levels. And finally, establishing a formal mechanism for collecting, analysing, and sharing data-driven insights from new strategies across the organisation, with leadership for organisational strategy and delivery, and mid-level management for program management.
Thank you so much, Sheila and Lucy, for this presentation. That was great. I would now like to open the floor to the audience for questions. Before we get started, I just want to mention again that everyone will receive a copy of the slides from today's session, as well as the recording. So look out for an email in the coming days with a link to download these and to share with your teams if you like. Now, I have received a few questions while you were doing the presentation, so I'll start off with those. And if you do have more questions, please use the Q&A box. You'll see a little tab at the bottom of your screen that you can use to send me your questions for Sheila and Lucy now. So one of the questions that came through was you were mentioning a data analytics capabilities framework. Can you speak a bit more about this and what this means?
Thanks, Isabel. It's Lucy here. So the data skills and capability in the APS, that was actually developed by the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet in collaboration with the Australian Public Service Commission and other Australian government entities and the private sector and academic sectors as well. And I think through that engagement, they basically built a framework that's developed to empower the APS to harness the value of data and increase data literacy across all levels of the APS. And the framework actually has 4 components. There's the Data Fellowship Program, there's university courses, there's the APS Data Literacy Program, and data training partnerships as well.
Great, thanks, Lucy. Another question came through, actually a couple around the EVP. How do you ensure that your EVP attracts the right talent?
Hi everyone, it's Sheila here. So the employee value proposition is, to get that right, it's really important. That's your first impression, outwardly impression to a potential candidate and a potential employee. So first and foremost, we would always recommend that you co-design your EVP with key stakeholders within the organisation. We really want to ensure that it's authentic and that stakeholders are able to clearly articulate it in a consistent manner. Remember, as you go through a recruitment process, your candidates will meet a number of people in your organisation, and so it's really important to ensure that they are able to articulate consistently your employee value proposition. and they're able to efficiently and effectively communicate that during the interactions and interviews. So we would recommend that you invest some time in actually developing that. Understand what's the specific DNA of your culture and your organisation, and use those data points to translate that into an EVP. If required, EY can help you to facilitate culture and leadership workshops to really help sort of draw that out and articulate that for you. And we can also help you to understand how that your employee value proposition stacks up against your competitors using existing benchmarks and information that we have to hand.
Great, thanks, Sheila. Another question around, well, you mentioned that being digitally savvy is important for governments. Isn't this true for all organizations? What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is important for all organizations. So our research at LinkedIn across the Asia and Pacific region show that 80% of industries actually saw growth in the proportion of digital skills hired out of the total amount of talent they hire. And what's even more interesting here is that the traditional industries, those such as banking and finance, they're actually growing 5 times faster than the tech in the proportion of digital hires being made.
Great, thanks, Lucy. I had a few questions around measurement as well, but before we get into that, a question that just came through when you were talking about EVP and being digitally savvy is, how do we work on the balance between government transparency and privacy of information? Do you have any recommendations there, Sheila or Lucy?
Yeah, so the balance of having transparency of information and what you can and can't share to the public versus privacy of information, it's a really key and quite a difficult balance to achieve. First and foremost, I would ask you to think about what's your cyber strategy. So what in your organisation have you thought about in terms of the strategy? And the cyber strategy isn't and shouldn't be just a technical strategy that sort of protects your technical landscape. It should also consider awareness. How does each and every single employee understand what it means to see the data that they are working with on a day-to-day basis, protect that information so they understand the challenges around accessing work information outside of the work environment, and really sort of what the potential implications of doing that could be. So first and foremost, I would ask you to think about that and work with your Chief Security Officer or your Chief Information Officer to understand what that is and how do you protect your core information. Then coupled with that, the second part of that is really your information management strategy and what is it that you choose as an organisation to share publicly, when and how you choose to share that. Some of that may be through marketing teams, some of that may be through your formal corporate comms teams. It really depends on the construct of your organisation, but to have that thought through and a strategy in place up front will help you to manage the information that you choose to share with the public versus the sort of information and the privacy challenge that every organisation has to manage.
Great, thanks, Sheila. Now I'd like to take some of the measurement questions that came in. So one of them was that, yes, testing and measuring is important, but we currently don't have that functionality within our team. Do you have any recommendation how to go about that? How can you try and measure your efforts?
I think this is a really great question, and I think this is where Sheila's recommendation earlier on the use of social platforms really comes into play. So these platforms often come with a suite of tools to enable measurement of performance and even suggestions for optimizing efficiency of effort, as well as potentially widening the pool of available candidates to you. So for example, at LinkedIn, with every campaign conducted, we measure the reach and engagement with the particular audience that we were trying to talk to. And based on those results, we either tweak the targeting or the types of content that we're using to ensure that we're using the best content that resonates most with the audience that we care about.
Great, thanks, Lucy. Another question around measurement. Can you recommend specific KPIs to track when you build the government of the future? Do you have any recommendations, Sheila, on which KPIs to track when you're measuring?
Sorry. Thank you for that. Yeah, so look, KPIs is always quite an interesting thing. and particularly in organisations like government sectors. So when we look at KPIs for each sort of major step in the talent acquisition strategy, think about what those KPIs are. So the number of applications for those difficult roles, how many applications have you had, how successful have those applications been, what have been the relevancy of the skills aligned to their application, have we managed to clearly articulate what skills we're actually looking for, and has that attracted the right number and the right types of applications? So there's some very hard sort of quantitative measures there. Also, the number of interviews that you've organised for each role, not just the difficult to fill roles. So have you had, on average, 5 candidates per role, or is it more or less than that? And is the candidate of the right criteria or the right quality that you're looking for? A couple of the other measures are how long does it take to actually to fill a position between issuing the original advertisement and actually accepting an offer. On average, many organisations say it's around 25 to 26 days, but would be really looking for ways to sort of bring that down. Can you use social media platforms, digital platforms in order to help you to reduce that turnaround time? The longer it takes you to fill a role, the more expensive it is in the recruitment cycle. So how can you find alternative measures to be able to bring that down? A couple of other, possibly not so much hardcore KPIs, but something I think to monitor would be around gender diversity. So when and how of your applicants, do you have the right balance of gender diversity? Is it attracting the right type of genders? That's not to say that we should favour one or the other, but obviously gender diversity in different roles across different organisations is becoming an increasing focus for many, many organisations going forward, particularly where you're looking at women in leadership roles or in senior roles. And so I think it's, in summary, there are a number of core KPIs that you can put in place to help you refine your recruitment process and make it much more efficient, ensuring that you're targeting the right candidates and attracting the right candidates. But then also there's some sort of softer measures that you can put in place just to sort of help make it a much more rounded process.
Thanks, Sheila. Great. Another question I thought that was interesting that came is around the aging workforce. How do you see an aging workforce retrain and become relevant to a digital environment? Do you have any thoughts on this?
There's lots of thoughts on this one. Look, the aging workforce, the biggest challenge many of our clients and organisations like yourself have is how do you encourage an aging workforce to want to build a new set of skills, particularly where they may be 5 or so years away from retiring. Why would I want to invest the time and effort? First and foremost, think about innovation and how can you bring innovative techniques into the training environment. So for these individuals, training has typically been to date either on-the-job training or sat in a classroom and sort of going through hardcore modules or even e-learning. How can you bring some of that training to life, and how can you bring some of the relevant experiences that they have in their world outside of their jobs to help sort of relate back to what they're doing? Most people these days will have smartphones, use iPads, some may even have smart TVs at home, certainly use computers. And so how do you bring some of that into your training? How do you ensure that you make the training varied, interactive, and so it's less of sitting and being taught out and learning, and it's more interactive and engaging. And so the scenarios you use, the activities that you use help them to relate not just to their day job, and we can ensure that they're operational and effective from day one, but how to relate it back to some of the core technologies that they would be using outside of their role. The new technologies that we're looking to implement are not difficult, they might be different, and it's really around how you generate a level of comfort leading up to the actual training activity and beyond so that people feel confident and operational.
Great. Thank you so much for your thoughts there, Sheila. We have a few minutes left, so I'd like to take a last question to wrap up the Q&A session. Is there a public organization that you would identify as an innovator leading the talent acquisition field? Any examples you can maybe share with the audience today?
Thanks, Isabel. It's Lucy here. I'll jump in on this one. Actually, LinkedIn has worked quite closely with the New Zealand Trade and Enterprise. It's a public organisation that really it focuses on international business. It's like an international business development agency. So what it does is it helps customers, those that are sort of ambitious, value add and knowledge intensive companies who are scaling from New Zealand, really helps them to grow internationally. So it's quite a unique organisation in that aspect. But what the challenge for them was is that they needed to expand its global talent pipeline to find the right candidates for its critical roles, which were typically specialised and leadership candidates in far-flung locations. And the way that they went about it was they first created a small talent acquisition team in New Zealand and then turned to LinkedIn to help build its global but virtual talent team. And really the whole idea of that was to make sure that its employer brand message actually got out into that international market and they knew who New Zealand Trade and Enterprise actually were. So like I mentioned, they needed to find local experts around the world who are familiar with their region's particular economic, cultural and business landscape. And the other hurdle was that they were also competing with the private sector for talent. So although they operate in the public sector, its customers are really corporate customers, and so they needed highly skilled industry experts with experience that can only be found in the private sector. And what they did differently and how they innovated was really about focusing on their employer brand and then how they actually developed that employer brand and put it out to market. And they did this by combining the talent acquisition team with the marketing team. So it really grabbed some of those marketing expertise to get that message out there. It's been really successful today.
Great, thanks for the example. Maybe take some time and take a look at their company page on LinkedIn and see what kind of content they're sharing and how they're positioning themselves. Thank you so much, Lucy and Sheila, for sharing your insights today. It was really great and answering all those questions. Everyone on the webcast, thank you so much for joining. Like I mentioned, we will be sending out the slides as well as the recording from today's session. We'll share that with all of you. In the email, you will also find a link to a white paper that contains all the insights that were shared today by Lucy and Sheila. So feel free to download that and share with your team. And if you want to find out more and have a chat to LinkedIn or EY, just click the Contact Us button. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll hope to see you at another webcast sometime soon. Thanks. Goodbye.